Well, you have seen nothing if you haven't seen this. Douglas Murray shed all the filters to speak the blunt truth on slavery and reparations once and for all, and it's about to make a lot of people very uneasy, and especially as Americans stand on the edge of a cultural shift with this election. Douglas's words are a bitter truth pill that we better swallow as a society sooner than later. Take a look for yourself before we dive in.
Douglas, the problem is we've forgotten how to be genuinely proud of our great countries, both America and the United Kingdom, two of the greatest countries in the world. It's almost like every day now, somebody somewhere, normally on the left, the woke left, is queuing up to find a reason to hate the countries and their histories.
Well, it's a kind of grievance competition. Your guest earlier just tried to engage in it. I don't know what hurt she believes she's had from slavery. All of this was addressed 2 centuries ago. Everything has consequences. All history has consequences and ramifications. But, you know, if we were to play this fairly, we would at least look at all of the countries around the world that engaged in the slave trade who are simply not interested in any form of reparations. The Ottoman Empire, all the Arab countries who not just traded far more slaves than across the Atlantic, but castrated all the men so that there wouldn't be any more African slaves after them. They worked them to the bone. I see no interest across Africa in paying reparations for selling their brother and sister Africans into slavery or for working them to the bone to the present day. There is slavery across Africa today. In fact, there are more slaves in the world today than there were at the height of the transatlantic slave trade. So some of us are simply a bit bored of hearing people ripping at closed wounds and then crying about their hurt.
Douglas hit the nail on the head with this one, especially considering how vulnerable he is to accusations of downplaying racism, or even being a racist himself by a left that's so sadly eager to do so. But you know what I think the core of this entire debate is to begin with? It's that a country like the US became morally very self-aware at some point in its history, eventually culminating in the abolition of slavery. And it's that moral progression that makes it attempt to correct past wrongs. By the way, we are having some really important conversations here, so please be sure to hit the subscribe button, notification bell, and never miss out. Now, the problem is a lot of civilizations and nations around the world simply lack that moral self-criticism to the point that we still see large-scale wrongs being committed in places like India with the brutal caste system, or in places like China with what's happening to millions of people in Xinjiang. And I'm sorry for my awful pronunciation, but let's move on to the important part where there are nearly 28 million innocent people who are in bonded labor according to the International Labor Organization. These are people that are trapped using predatory debt by landowners in remote areas and made to work their entire lives for free in order to repay that debt. That's why it's almost feeling like people in the US or UK have a very myopic view of how bad things are in the world even today, just how far our countries have come to truly become a more perfect union over its time.
Everybody could do this. 1 million Europeans were stolen by North Africans over the course of decades of the North African Barbary pirate slave trade. Where would you end if you did that? The answer is you couldn't end, because nobody is alive who has actually suffered the hurt, and nobody is alive who did the wrong. And I'd make one other point, if I may. It's always the countries that people want to come to who are put through this struggle session. Britain, like America and France, are the most desired destinations for migrants worldwide, and have been for centuries. Why is that? It's not because we're racist, it's because we're better. It's because we're good. It's because when we see racism, we actually call it out and recognize it as a sin. Try finding that across Africa. Try finding that across the Middle East or in China. Nobody would hear. So what we have is a situation where the more virtuous countries are presented as the worst countries. It's sick, and most of us are tired of it.
Precisely. And does anyone really think any supposed reparations will forever do away with discussions like this? Of course not. Because the truth is, all of this hinges on the idea that your guilt, pride, or punishment should carry forward through generations. And that's an obscenely collectivist idea which is inherently opposed to what this country stands for. Not just that, it's opposed to the individualist tradition that eventually got rid of the institution of slavery to begin with, because America understood that every citizen and every human is made in the image of God. I remember it was Jordan Peterson that actually put the question to Michael Eric Dyson once he was constantly put on the back foot for his white privilege. Jordan had a perfectly sarcastic response to this.
Let's assume for a moment that I've benefited from my white privilege. Okay, so let's assume that. That's
a good
fine.
assumption.
That's what you would say. So, so let's say, here, let's get precise about this, okay?
Was that very individual of you?
Let's get precise about this, okay?
Let's get precise.
To what degree is my present level of attainment or achievement a consequence of my white privilege? And I don't mean sort of. I mean, do you mean 5%? Do you mean 15%? Do you mean 25%? Do you mean 75%? And what do you propose I do about it? How about a tax? How about a tax that's like specialized for me so that I can account for my damn privilege, so that I can stop hearing about it?
And by the way, if we're even going to open this Pandora's box of overcorrecting for past injustices, why stop at one thing? Even going further back, the indigenous people in the Americas saw millions of lives lost when the foundation was laid for the United States. And considering that even many pro-reparation individuals today, like Sonny Hostin, have their ancestors who were slaveholders themselves.
I didn't think I was, my family was originally from Spain and slaveholders.
Yeah. And by the way, what about people like me who are adopted and don't know any of my birth family? Is it my adopted family who has to pay reparations? And even more importantly, who's going to do this grim accounting of human suffering into monetary terms? These are questions that are impossible to answer, and that is exactly why Paula Roan on this panel didn't have a way to counter what Douglas Murray said, other than to implicitly accuse him of glossing over people's suffering.
I am so sorry that Douglas is bored by the pain that has come from
That's not what he said.
Through slavery.
He didn't say. He didn't say. But what you're doing there, what you're doing. Yeah, but hang on, Paula. Paula, you're being very disingenuous. That's not what he said.
I am.
The viewers aren't stupid. They know exactly what he said. He's not saying he's bored by the pain. He's saying, and I think it's a perfectly valid point, the pain that people who are alive today are claiming they're suffering for what happened 200 or 300 years, it's not a real pain. They're not the ones who suffered what was going on 200 or 300 years ago.
So in terms of justice for all, I mean, I think we'd all agree that there should be justice.
Well, I'm not suffering from when the Normans invaded this country.
Agree.
I'm not suffering from what my ancestors went through.
I noticed that I'm not being allowed to respond.
Or from the Romans. In other words, where do you take this? I mean, should I now be feeling pain from what the Romans did to this country?
In terms of slavery, I can take it to 2015, when the slave owners were compensated by the government. So I can take it to that extent.
Where does your personal pain come?
And I can say to you that I don't think that apologising is a bad thing. I think that apologising for a wrong is a good thing. I think that the Dutch royal family have done a fantastic thing in acknowledging what has gone wrong
I hear you, but
in society.
I honestly think it'll make no difference at all.
That is pathetic. Of course this didn't work because it was never going to. People like Paula obviously understand that, which is why you see her immediately move the goalpost to apologizing or acknowledging racism and slavery as if we do not already. Of course we do. Most of these discussions on reparations tend to end in a similar way as they did now, and the only result is greater division among people when they are made out to be the oppressor or the oppressed. But let me know in the comments what you thought about this and share this with people that have an important voice to add to this conversation. Until then, we're constantly shedding the racist baggage of our past, making these calls for reparations appear more like a debate tactic than a genuine policy.